The frozen expressions of terror were still stuck on their face when we pulled them out of the water. I guess unless they're cremated, they'll be stuck like that forever, huh? Anyway, we pulled them up on board and we put the bodies back behind the wheelhouse, and with the supposed Manchurian gold, I picked it up, held it very closely to me, and I put it in the wheelhouse of the tugboat. And then I went below deck. And I grabbed me a towel and then tore off that wetsuit like my life depended on it. Oh, I was so happy to be rid of that thing. But even when I did take off those heavy wet clothes, it was almost as if the weight that usually comes off of you, it just didn't come off on me. If anything, I felt like it was getting heavier and heavier. But I put on my regular clothes back on, and then I went to go talk to Mia, and I basically just asked, "Okay, Mia, what do you think about all this?" And she said, "I tell you what, Ethan, it was just horrifying the way those bodies were left. I do think there was some foul play here, Ethan, and I don't even want to know what it is." And I said, "Yeah, agree. Let's just get the bodies and the gold into the Bay of Incheon, and let's get on the first flight out of here. Yeah, we need to get out of here. Whew." And she said, "Wait, Ethan, don't you want to see the nightlife of South Korea first?" And I said, "Well, Mia, we can go out drinking those weird K-pop drinks if you want to, but no, not me." And she said, "Aw, are you afraid you're going to see a dragon?" And I said, "Shut the fuck up, Mia. I had a very serious dream about that, okay?" But seriously, though, like, how do you feel about having kids? I mean, because that's something I'm open to doing. And she said, "Ethan, can we not talk about this right now?" And I said, "All right, okay." And then I went into the wheelhouse of the boat, and I looked at the captain, so to speak, and I said, "Okay, what do you think about all this? You think you're going to be able to get us into port?" And she said, "Yes, I think I'll be able to get us into port, Ethan. I know how to do my job, but I don't know, something just doesn't feel right." What is that coming out of the water? And then she looked forward, and then she started to walk off, and she walked out of the wheelhouse, and I followed her, and then she looked into the horizon, and then nothing. She had an expression on her face as if she was disappointed by what she found or didn't find. It was almost as if she was expecting to find something, but she didn't. And so, me and Felicity, we decided to go back down below deck. And then we saw that Olsen was cooking, and I heard he was a pretty good cook, and I think he was cooking something like Korean beef, like beef orang, something like that. I don't know, but I do know it smelled good, and yeah, I was really hoping those rumors about Olsen being a good cook were true. Yeah. But there was one person that was missing, the E5 that was also on the boat, Franks. Where was he? That was weird. And then, just as Olsen was serving us in this little room we had below deck. You see, there was a stove, a little fridge, and there was also a table with some chairs and a few cots laid out. And then Frank comes in there, and he strolls in, stops, and looks at us and says, "Which one of you stole it?" And we all looked at him as like, "What? Which one of you stole it?" And Joseph Conrad, being the frat boy that he is, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you talking about who stole all the beer? Yeah, it was me, man." And then out of nowhere, where he pulls out a gun on him, and then points right at his neck and says, this is serious. Who stole the Manchurian gold?" And I looked at him and I said, "Somebody stole the Manchurian gold?" And he points the gun right at my head and said, "Yes, who stole it?" I didn't know what to think. Like, what? Surely we were all briefed on what the Manchurian gold was, and surely we all knew what it was. And then Captain Fliss stands up and says, "You need to stand down now, Franks. Right now. Stand down right now, or what?" Frank says as he aims the pistol right at Captain Fliss. He says, "Or I will court-martial you." In fact, I'm gonna go into the wheelhouse where the Manchurian gold was, and I'm gonna conduct my own investigation. And Franks once again points the gun and says, "Oh no, you're not. I have to do my investigation. You're still a suspect." And she says, "No, I am the commanding officer here, so I demand that you..." And then Captain Fliss, her head just... her head just came apart. The golden bullet entered her in the front and exploded out the back of her head. And it got on the gray metal walls, and then she just slumped over. We all stood and watched in horror for the first few seconds. And then we started to scream, and he waved the gun right back at us and said, "Shut up, shut the fuck up. All right, now I'm going to see which one of you stole it." And then I grabbed Joseph and then put him in front of us, and he was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? And then I used Joseph as cover to say to Mia, "You and me, we got to use our training to take this guy out. You distract him, and I'll use my strength." Got it? Got it. And then Mia strolled over to him and said, "Franks, I don't think you're being very fair." "This is an investigation," Frank said. And then Mia protested and said, "Do you have any investigation training? Are you an MP? In fact, who's the Master at Arms here?" And then the skinny little E3 raised his hand and said, "I am." And the skinny little E3 that I was referring to was Junior. It's just that he was very timid. And Mia said, "Okay, well, it should be it should be Junior's responsibility to see if there was a crime that was committed and to find out where to go from there. Shouldn't it be? And Franks did concede a little bit and said, perhaps you are right. But how do I know Junior isn't one of them? One of them? And by that time, we were getting closer and closer to him with the gun. And then he chillingly said, yes, one of them. One of the creatures. What creatures? And then Mia spat right in his face, and I charged towards him. And then with my strength, I punched him right in the face, grabbed his arm, and pulled it, and nearly broke it. And then I punched him in the face again. Harder this time. Significantly harder. And Franks fell over, and I grabbed the gun from him, and he looked up with his face bloody. Thanks again to Dr. Eugenic for giving me those powers. Thanks again, buddy. I mean, I think you're a terrible person, but you gave me those powers. And he looked up at me and said, You are the creature. And then, out of nowhere, Franks went for the knife that Olsen had been using to cook, and then lunged at me, and then, pow! I shot him right through the chest. And that was it. Okay, I knew what I had to do now. I had to go all the way up on deck to the wheelhouse and then call in for backup and tell them our coordinates. And so I marched up there with my pistol, the pistol that I just found on the boat, and I did exactly that. And then I called into the radio and I said, we have an emergency. Our coordinates are, I can't remember our coordinates, but we have 2 people dead, and we have found the bodies as well as the Manchurian gold, but there has been somewhat of a mutiny on board, and we have 2 dead STARS agents. I repeat, 2 dead STARS agents. Please, hurry. This is our location. And he said, and the lieutenant on there said, yes, we will send out help as soon as possible. Stay where you are and remain calm. And I was like, okay. I just need to take charge of this situation and remain calm. And then I noticed clouds in the distance. It was as if they were coming towards me. And then the wind started to pick up faster and faster and faster, and the sky turned completely black with clouds. And then thunder and lightning just started to litter the sky. And I saw hundreds and hundreds of lightning bolts going off all over the place. And I thought, what the hell? And then the torrential downpour. And then to the horizon line, I saw what appeared to be the tugboat, but it was brown and had like barnacles and marine growth on it. And wait a minute. That was the same tugboat that we were just exploring below the waves. And I could see those 2 dead sailors on there. Like their arms were were spread out, and they appeared to be doing some kind of dance from hell, and they were trying to scream at me, but I couldn't make out what they were screaming because the thunder. I couldn't hear them over the thunder, but I saw them in the distance, and so I immediately flew open the door, and I ran out of that wheelhouse, and I looked, but it was as if the boat was just getting further and further away from me, and then I heard, boom, like a footstep behind me, and I spin around, gun in hand, and then I see the 2 dead sailors that were recovered from the ocean, but this time they were standing right in front of me, and I couldn't believe it. The horror, the still frozen expressions of horror on their face, and they just stood there at me. And I raised my gun, and they held their hands up in defense, and were they trying to hurt me? I didn't know. But they weren't making any moves towards me. And then I feel a cold hand touch me, and I look over, and then it's a white woman with shoulder-length blonde hair and blue eyes. And I look at her, and I was confused at first, and I couldn't tell you why I did what I did, but I smiled at her, and she smiled back, and then her lips started to peel away, showing her teeth. And her skin started to turn gray and then peel back. And then it was like her skin was just drying out, and it was just getting more and more leathery. And then eventually it looked just like she was like a leathery corpse. And the hair just started to fall out in clumps, and eventually the hair just didn't even look like hair anymore. It looked like dust particles and dust clumps just falling out of her head, and she smiled at me, and that god-awful smile with her teeth out, and the rotting teeth were falling out, and she raised her hands towards me, and then I raised my gun again, and I saw the zombies, the 2 dead crewmen. They were standing right in front of me, and then one of them grabbed me, and then I felt the nurse grab the hand with my gun in it, and then I hear a voice say, Ethan, it's okay." It was a very calm male's voice, and then I realized someone's touching my shoulder, but I don't think it feels warm. It can't be the 2 dead guys. And then I look over, and it's Joseph Conrad, and he has my shoulder, and he's just gently holding my arm. It's as if he was trying to calm me down. And I think that's what he was doing, trying to calm me down. And then Mia was standing right in front of me, looking terrified. The gun was right in her face. And I just dropped it. And I started to cry. "Mia, I'm so sorry." And he says, and then Joseph, with his calming voice, pats me and says, "It's okay. You didn't know. Isn't that right, Mia? It's okay because he didn't know." And then Mia nods for confirmation. And I run over to the back behind the wheelhouse where the 2 bodies were, and they were still there. And then I looked in the wheelhouse, and I could still see the brown box. But I I just had a bad feeling. I didn't even want to get anywhere close to the brown box with those yellow Manchurian chemicals in it. Didn't want to get anywhere close. And then I hear a brrrr, and then it was early nighttime by this point, but I see a fast gray boat, like quickly approaching us. And then I hear whoa, 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 whoa. And then I hear it's a helicopter. And then I can barely hear anything over the noise of the helicopter because it's right above us. And then, like, it's a rather big helicopter, like one of those Hueys. And then the Huey, it drops down some ropes. And, well, it was part of our training to grab on, to be able to propel up and down from a helicopter. And then these sailors that were getting on board the boat where the bodies and the Manchurian gold were, they were getting in what looked like spacesuits. And then they said, "This is an unclean area. This place has become contaminated with an unknown substance. We believe that it is causing hallucinogens. We believe that Manchurian gold causes hallucinations and psychosis." And I thought, oh, no. Nope, it's best that we get out of here. Don't ask questions. Let's just get out of here. And so we grabbed on the remaining surviving crew members. Me, Mia, Joseph, Jr., and Olson all grabbed onto the ropes, and it pulled us up, and we rode back to Incheon, South Korea, in complete silence. Olson, after that, he got a job as an auto mechanic in Ethalonia. I keep in touch with him sometimes, and Junior, he stayed in Stars after that, but he remained a Master at Arms, but eventually he did get out of Stars eventually, and he, in 2022, he became an Ethalonian cop, and last I heard from him, he likes it, and, well, when we got back to Ethalonia in March of 2019, Joseph, he was promoted to E4, and then he was assigned to go to the Republic of the Congo, where he went off on his own adventure. And he wrote about it, and yeah, he wrote his own book about it. You should really read it. But we had to have a long word with our commanding officer, Chris Redfield, about this. And Chris just said, "Wow, you've only been on 2 real missions for me, and both of them have involved you calling in helicopters because you found a dangerous hallucinogen, and you were having violent, deadly, psychotic hallucinations because of something that you were exposed to. That's what both of these missions have been about now." That's crazy. Yeah, that is just unthinkable. Like, you two might be my most unlucky agents ever. In fact, take some time off. I insist. And we said, okay. And remember when I talked about me and Mia talking about having kids?